welcome to video guide for practical 8. This is the Virtual Institute for Capacity Building in Higher Education. I am Eyitope Ogunbodede. We are going to look closely into what you need to be able to successfully grade practical 8, which is titled Developing a Fundraising Plan. First, let me take you through some of the things that we expected our participants to do. The first thing is for them to have a good overview of what the assignment is all about. And so in this practical session, participants were requested to develop a comprehensive fundraising plan tailored to their research project, identify potential funding sources, develop a case for support tailored to a funding source, create a timeline for securing the necessary funding, and identify key performance indicators, KPIs, for their funding efforts. So in summary, so what we are expecting from the participants is that they should, 1, assess their research funding needs, 2, identify at least 3 potential funding sources, 3, develop a case for support tailored to one funding source, 4, create a timeline for securing the necessary funding, and then 5, list and discuss at least 3 key performance indicators that can be used to monitor their fundraising plan. So I will now go into each of those 5 parts. Part 1, which is to assess their funding needs. They will have to choose or propose a research project, and this could be their existing research project or a new one in their field of interest. And then they give the title of the research, and then they write a summary of less than 500 words outlining the financial needs of their research. You are not going to score this, the title of the research and the summary, because that we have done in previous practical works. And then they will also, in this part of the assignment, be giving a budget breakdown. They have to itemize the projected cost for personnel, equipment and materials, travel costs, data collection, publications and dissemination, direct costs or overheads. If they are going to be consultants, yes, and subcontractors, they need to indicate, and then the contingency funds and any other relevant items. And then here, they also would specify what needs to be funded immediately and what will require funding later in the research time. And then they also have to give a justification to provide a rationale for why these resources are essential for their research. In the second part, what are we expecting? In the second part, we expect them to list and describe at least 3 potential funding sources that align with their research. And then source 1 should be a government grant or research council. Source 2 should be private or corporate sponsorship. And their source 3 should be philanthropic organization or foundation, just to be sure that they are quite aware of the differences between those 3 funding bodies. And then for each source, they need to include the reason this source is relevant to their research, any specific criteria or eligibility requirement for applying, and then the potential amount of funding that they intend to secure. In the third part, we expect that they will be writing a 1 to 2 page case for support tailored to one specific funding source. And then they should use these 5 subheadings. 1, the problem statement. They need to clearly define the problem that the research addresses. 2, they describe the solution. They need to describe the research method and approach that they will use. And then they also need to discuss the impact. They need to explain how the research will benefit society, academia, or the funding body. And then 4, the unique selling points of their research. They need to highlight the novelty and innovation of the research. And then 5, they need to discuss how their research work aligns with the funders' goals. They must show how the research fits within the goals or mission of the selected funding body. And then in the fourth part of the assignment, they need to develop a 12 to 24-month timeline that outlines their research activities. So, and this they will divide into short term, 0 to 6 months, mid term, 6 to 12 months, and then long term, 12 to 24 months. They may also, include any key deadlines, such as grant application dates, speech meetings, and follow-ups. And then in the fifth part of the assignment, they need to define key performance indicators, KPIs, that can be used to monitor their fundraising plan. And so now, how do you now evaluate the submissions? The evaluation criteria and scoring will be as follows. One, the first part, assessment of funding needs, will be 50 marks. Identification of at least 3 potential funding sources will be 60 marks. Developing the case for support tailored to one funding source will be 100 marks. Creating a timeline for securing the necessary funding will be 30 marks. Listing and discussing at least 3 key performance indicators that can be used to monitor the fundraising plan will attract a score of 60 marks. So the total will be 300 marks. Now, how do you score each of those parts? Part 1, the budget breakdown, we attract a score of 20 marks. And so 4 marks for each item subject to maximum of 20 marks. You can see that on that we have I've listed like 9 items, but once they are able to mention 5 of those 9 items, so it will attract a 4 of score each, and that will be 20. Any extra listings, will not attract any additional marks. Maximum here should be 20 marks. And then specifying what needs to be funded immediately and what will require funding later in the research, the short term, the mid term, and the long term needs, attract a score of 20 marks. And then the justification, we also attract a score, of 10 marks. So you also must know that there is no score for the project title and summary, which I've mentioned before. So the total score for part 1 is 50 marks with the breakdown as I have listed. Then for part 2, which is listing and discussing at least 3 funding sources, this will attract a score of 60 marks. You list and discuss at least 3 potential sources that align with your research, and that will be 14 marks, 4 marks for listing and 10 for discussion for each of the 3 KPIs. So when 14 marks for each one, I repeat again, 4 marks for listing, and so for the 3, that will be 12 marks, 4 for each listing. If the candidate succeeds in listing the 3, it will be 12 marks, and then 10 marks for the discussion. And so for each of the 3. And so that should in total be 30 marks. So, but for each one, it will be 14. 4 for listing, and then additional 10 for the discussion, which will be 14 marks. Now, where do you get the extra, that will make it 20 for each listing? For each source, you have to include the reason this source is relevant to your research. That will be 2 marks. Any specific area or eligibility requirement for applying, 2 marks. The potential amount of funding you will secure, that will be 2 marks. And so when you add the 6 marks to the 14 for each source, that will be 20 for each source. And for the 3 sources, it will be 60 marks. Now, let us continue. So how do you score for the sources? Source 1 will be government grant or research council or whatever. So that is governmental. So that will be 14 marks. And then the reason for this source being relevant to your research, 2 marks. Specific criteria, 2 marks. Potential amount of funding, 2 marks. And that will be 14 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. I mean, that's 14 plus 6, which will give you 20 marks. Source 2 is the same, but that will be private. And source 3 should be philanthropic organization. So that is how we arrive at the score of 60. For part 3, it will attract 100 marks. And in this case, problem statement will be 20 marks, solution will be 20 marks, the impact will be 20 marks, the unique selling point will be 20 marks, and alignment with funders' goals will also be 20 marks, giving a total of 100. And then for part 4, here you are to create a fundraising timeline, which will be 30 marks. So short term, identifying the sources you will approach first and outline the grant application process will be 10 marks. Mid-term, plan for potential follow-up funding or application to additional sources will be 10 marks. And then long-term mentioning and discussing that will be 10 marks. And the total for part 4 of the assignment will be 30 marks. And then the last part, which is the 5th part, listing and discussing at least 3 key performance indicators that can be used to monitor the fundraising plan will be 60 marks. When the candidate lists and discusses at least 3 KPIs to measure the success of the fundraising plan, such as a number of new donors, total funds raised, donor retention rates, etc. So it will be 20 for each one that is mentioned, subject to a maximum of 60 marks. So, and how do you break this down? 5 marks for listing the source, and then 15 for the discussion. So giving a total of 20 marks for each of the 3, and then 60 marks in total. Now, what is the summary of what we have been discussing? Assessment of funding needs, 50 marks. Identification of 3 potential funding sources, 60 marks. Developing a case for supporting lot to 1 funding source, 100 marks. Creating a timeline for securing the necessary funding, 30 marks. Listing and discussing at least 3 key performance indicators that can be used to monitor the fundraising plan, 60 marks, and then the total will be 300 marks. So how do we expect the candidates to submit this assignment? The practical should be submitted in a single file that should be in a MS Word format. Please note that there is no penalty for the number of words for this assignment. There is no word limit for the assignment. Participants are to submit both on VICBHE app and the Google form using the links that have already been shared with the participants. So with this, I think it should be very clear how we should score practical 8. Thank you very much for your efforts, for your commitment, for what you have been doing to ensure that the VICBHE Module 9 has been running seamlessly. Thank you very much.